The Chesapeake Bay is one of the world's largest estuaries, stretching 200 miles long and holding 18 trillion gallons of water. The bay supports more than 2,700 species of plants and animals, including 348 species of finfish and 173 species of shellfish. The Chesapeake Bay is home to more than 17 million people. About 150,000 people move into the Bay watershed each year. The Chesapeake Bay is also polluted. The Chesapeake Bay has shown alarming levels of pollution since the late 1970s. What's more alarming is the amount of people who don't know about the bay's condition. My crew and I went down to Fort Armistead Park in Curtis Bay, Maryland, to see if we can find anything that might be causing water pollution. Statistically, Curtis Bay, Maryland is the #1 area in the state in terms of emitting air pollution, which has been linked to water pollution. While we were down there, me and my crew saw lots of industrial factories, smokestacks, and trash everywhere, all of which contribute to the problem.
See this? You don't
We also found a tire
oh, look at it. Look at it.
and another tire.
Sick, bro. It's disgusting.
So how can we explain the bay pollution scientifically? The answer is simple: nutrient pollution. The two main nutrients that are polluting the bay are nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen and phosphorus fuels the unnatural growth of algae. Excessive algae turns the water into a greenish-brownish color and uses up oxygen. The dark shade of green and brown blocks sunlight from reaching the bottom of the bay. The restriction of sunlight depletes more oxygen and causes the wildlife to die. So the question is, how do we purify the bay? To get a little more background on the problem and how it can be fixed, my crew and I visited the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation is a non-profit organization dedicated to purifying the bay. They treat pollution so seriously that they only allow hybrid vehicles to park close to the building. This is done to prevent high amounts of runoff from getting into the bay produced from regular vehicles. Because of that, we couldn't get a good parking spot.
That's a big problem.
While we were there, we interviewed the senior water quality scientist, Beth McGee, who was able to give us some insight about the bay.
Living, they're dead. What causes the dead zone are two things, nitrogen and phosphorus. Those are nutrients. You know, we add them to our lawns to make grass grow. Farmers add them in the field to grow crops. The problem is when they run off the land and get into waterways, including the Chesapeake Bay, they spur the single-celled plants in the bay, the algae that we call algae in the bay, to bloom. When the algae bloom, that's a problem because some species are actually toxic. It also they shade underwater grasses, but more importantly, the relationship to the dead zone is that when the algae die, sink to the bottom, when they're decomposed, oxygen is used up. And so that's why we have these big dead zones that tend to be concentrated in deeper areas because the algae are dying, sinking to the bottom, and then oxygen is used up and we have dead zones. So the solution is to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus from coming into the Chesapeake Bay and the rivers and streams that feed it.
She explained how people don't understand the true problems of the bay and how a polluted bay can hurt the economy.
In terms of the public's knowledge about the bay, I would say that most people don't really understand the true problems of the bay. We've done a lot of polling, so the good news is that people care about the bay, people care about their local streams, if not the bay, then their local streams. So there's a high level of concern for the environment, but in terms of what our individual actions are doing, for example, to add pollution or what the solutions are, I would say we need to do a lot more education. We've seen a lot of watermen go out of business. We've seen the businesses associated with oysters, for example, the oyster shucking houses close down, the restaurants not being able to serve local fare anymore. So, you know, people who directly are making a livelihood on the bay, but also it can affect tourism. You know, people don't want to come to an area if they're going to come down to the water and either not be able to go into it because it's unsafe to swim, or maybe there's a fish kill going on. So it really has sort of a ripple effect throughout the economic system, and we've seen, economic losses because the bay is polluted.
The most valuable thing we learned is how anyone can improve the life of the bay.
One thing to keep in mind is that roughly 1/3 of the nitrogen pollution to the bay is actually coming from the air, which means coal combustion for electricity, means driving your car. So some people might not realize if I use less electricity, I drive my car less, that's actually helping the bay because it's reducing nitrogen pollution. So that's one thing. People have lawns, people love to fertilize their lawns. We would encourage people not to fertilize their lawns and in fact replace a lot of their grass, or ideally all of their grass, with native plants that don't need watering, that don't need fertilizing, so you're reducing the amount of pollution that's running off of your residence. Things like rain barrels, where you attach them to your downspouts, so rather than pollution or runoff coming from your roof, you're actually capturing it, keeping it from going into the storm sewer, but also it's water that you can use to water your plants and things. So those are just a few things that we can do to improve the bay and the impact that we have on the bay by doing those activities.
She also emphasized how important it is to voice your concerns about the bay to your elected officials.
We look at laws and regulations and try to pass laws that are good for the bay and fight laws that are bad for the bay. Having the public call their elected officials is really one of the most powerful tools we have, is people weighing into their elected officials, whether it's at the congressional level, at the county level, or at the state level. I have seen elected officials be in one position on a bill and we pound them with phone calls and visits, and we've seen them actually shift their position. So it really does matter. If you care about clean water, really the best thing you can do is try to live your life, less polluting, but also let your elected officials know how you feel.
I like to think that one of the world's largest estuaries, which isn't far from my house, is not polluted. Everyone should feel the same way. That means you. So put it on your checklist to start practicing environmentally responsible habits and contact your elected officials to save the bay. Our environment, the world in which we live and work, is a mirror of our attitudes and expectations. So gain some self-respect, treat the Chesapeake Bay with respect, and encourage others to do the same.